Thank you, Jorge, and thank you all for being here on what I think is going to be a pretty wonderful night. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all and with Carol Lee and Ramona Mar to talk about this very beautiful and important work. And we all know the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, there are generations of stories to be told in the photographs that are contained in Vitality, iconic images, hidden stories, and as you heard, it's inspired by the exhibition that is on now at the Chinatown Storytelling Centre, featuring the work of Fred Herzog, but of course it's augmented by incredible research by the team that includes Susanna Ng as well. They have archival photos and stories collected from the community. And we're going to start off with a presentation from both Carol and Ramona, taking us through some of those photographs. Carol Lee is the co-founder of the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation and is the driving force behind the Chinatown Storytelling Centre. Ramona Mar is part of the content and programming team at the center and is a longtime journalist. And together they co-authored this book along with Susanna Ng, who is sitting in the front row and will be signing books as well later. But we'll begin now with a presentation. We'll start by calling Carol Lee up.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you all for being here on this rainy Vancouver night. On behalf of the volunteers and the staff at the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation, I want to thank Jorge for inviting us to the VPL, and of course to Margaret for her support for all of our work at the Storytelling Centre. We're delighted you can all join us. I'd also like to have the call out to my co-authors, Susanna Ng and Ramona Mar. This book would not have been possible without them. So, let's take a look. Vitality, the book. Our book and the exhibition that inspired it is simply Vitality, because from the very beginning we wanted to be inspirational. For the past 14 years, the Vancouver Chinatown Foundation has worked to revitalize the neighborhood and uplift the lives of the people who live there. When I was asked by Andy Sylvester of Equinox Gallery to curate an exhibition of Fred Herzog photographs of Chinatown for the Capture Photography Festival, I said, I'd love to do that, and it would be great if we could also include the photographs of Hastings Street and Strathcona, because Fred did such a wonderful job of capturing the vitality of these neighborhoods, and I think he would be delighted to know that they were being used to revitalize those very same neighborhoods. And actually, his children, who one lives here, one lives up north, they actually came to take a look at the exhibition, and they concurred. They said, our father would be very, very happy to be seen in this way. So Fred Herzog's iconic photographs are proof that the area has colorful and substantial roots. And when we paired his photographs to the stories we've been documenting over the last 5 years, it gave us an opportunity to shine a light on the vibrancy of the neighborhood during its heyday and radiate a theme of hope. In other words, the photographs and the stories serve as powerful reminders of what the neighborhood once was and what it can become again. So our space is limited, and we have many stories to pair with Herzog's iconic photographs. So it was obvious that we had to expand the project into a book as well, and so that's why we're here tonight. So for myself, much of the book is personal. And so here's a picture of me. This is my kindergarten photograph at Chinese Presbyterian Church. And I was a valedictorian. I'm the second from the right, the tall one. And I actually had to give the speech in Cantonese and English, so that was absolutely the last time I spoke Cantonese. Yeah. So some of my other childhood memories revolve around Chinatown and Hastings Street. It was a happy time. Chinatown felt like one big community in which everyone knew each other and the streets were alive. I have fond memories of my Uncle Jack taking me for lunch at the only seafood restaurant, and my mom taking me and my siblings to shop at Woodward's and Army and Navy. I think it was on these special outings that I developed my love of historic Hastings Street. So this is, we're going to look at a few of the photographs, and they asked me, well, which is my favorite? And this is one entitled His Last Bubblegum. And this is probably one of my favorites because it reminds me a lot of my brothers who would have been, at this age when we're going to Chinatown, horsing around and playing. And the exuberance of childhood is undeniable in this photograph. And, I think that we have titles for each one of our stories. And this one originally was, we called it, Raised in Chinatown. And we changed it to Raised by Chinatown. Because I think it sort of shows the importance of growing up in a community that supports you. And I think what is significant here is that, there was a lot of barrier breakers in one generation. Because if you think, my father was born in 1933, the height of the Depression, there was a lot of, discrimination. But it raised 3 university chancellors in one generation. So Brant Louis and Milton Wong were chancellors at SFU. My father was a chancellor at UBC. But I think it says a lot about the people, but also about the country in which they were living. It says a lot about the people of Vancouver that allowed this to happen. So that is one of my favorites, and it's paired. The story is also paired with, so all of our stories had interviews, and this one here, so my father and his brother Bill, who's still alive, he just celebrated his 88th birthday a month ago on a bicycle, and they grew up on Union Street. And the one next to them is Paul and Vernon Yee, who were raised in Strathcona. And Paul, who's on the right, is a future Governor General award-winning author. And the next slide. But you can see how happy they were. So there's forewords in the book by both Paul and Douglas Copeland. And, we love this quote that basically the photographs in this book are the DNA of this neighborhood. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so this is for anybody who kind of grew up in the, I guess it was probably around the 60s or 70s, you could actually go to Chinatown and get a chicken. And you actually picked it out and they would go in the back room and prepare it. So we've often wondered, who was the young man who was holding the chickens that were soon to be doomed? And I was at a seniors event about 2 or 3 weeks ago in Richmond, taking my mother there. She was getting an award at 91. And this man came up to me and goes, oh, my nephew sent me a picture. And apparently I'm in your Vitality show. And so here he is here. This is actually somebody I know, Howard Leung. And I said, well, show me the photograph. So here it is. And I think this is probably a good time for me to hand the podium over to my co-author, Ramona, because she has even a more personal story to reflect, because she's in this photo. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. I didn't wear that dress. It doesn't fit me anymore. But that's me and my sister. And I think you would all agree that odors and smells actually, they do contain memory. And the photo was taken by my father, and it reminds me that I was very impatient, and I did plead with him to take it very quickly because I remember the smell was pretty unsettling. As personal as this project was to Carol, so it was for me. This 1958 photo, which Herzog titled Peter's Coffee Bar, unlocked another story from my youth. So this building is still there today. It was built in 1901. It's at 511 Carroll Street, and it's home to Aaron Templeton's leather goods store. And prior to that, it was rented to the legendary modernized tailors for 40 years. Now, the front door faces Carroll Street, and its back door opened onto Shanghai Alley. And that was the crowded tenement that, along with the parallel Canton Alley, was home to up to 1,000 Chinese people. And this little girl is named Lori Chong. She just turned 90 recently. She described how she lived there with her family and how she was befriended by a Cantonese opera star who was performing at the Alley's Sing-Kyu Theater. This photo was taken in front of that theater in 1938. So Shanghai and Canton alleys were condemned in the late 1940s, and residents like Lori moved further east, and many of them to the Strathcona neighborhood. But back to that building's front door. I've long known this story of a 21-year-old man who arrived in Vancouver in 1911. He was lonely, penniless, filled with despair, And he sat down in front of this building at 511 Carroll. He had a good cry, and he turned around, he looked at it, and he said, "I'm going to own that building one day." And 26 years later, he did. And that man was my grandfather, Lee King Sing, or Jim Lee as he was known. When Grandfather Lee told me that story, I was only 21 myself, and I was too ignorant to bother asking him what building he was talking about. So it wasn't until researching this book that my uncle mentioned that Fred Herzog had taken a photo of that very building. So I was really thrilled to match that story with this photo. Evidence of hope and resilience, themes that come up time and time again in our work, as demonstrated in the life of my mother's father. So this picture is called Hastings Carroll to Columbia. Herzog's nighttime photo of East Hastings reminds us that it was once a go-to destination for entertainment. Those of you of a certain age will remember. It was taken in 1958 and shows us why the street was dubbed the Hastings Great White Way. It was a reference to the bright lights of New York's Broadway. The entertainment district spilled over to Pender Street, and if you were here in the 60s and 70s, you may remember that Chinatown was a lively hub after dark. Patrons from all over Vancouver flocked to the clubs like the Kubla Khan, the Mailing Supper Club, and the Forbidden City. And one of the most legendary was the Marco Polo. I think Victor Louis Jr. is here. That is his father, Victor Louis, pictured here with the club's so-called China dolls. And together, Victor and his brother Alex managed to attract up-and-coming stars like entertainers Richard Pryor, The Fifth Dimension, The Platters, and Nina Simone. They all graced the stage at Pender and Columbia. Some of you are too young to even know who those names are. But one night, a Chinatown raised guitarist named Henry Young, he's over there on the right with the glasses, he was then performing with Vancouver's first multiracial band, Little Huey and the Mistress. Anyway, Henry so impressed the great Nina Simone that she recruited him to tour with her, which of course Henry did. And we are happy to say that Henry did return to Vancouver, where he still visits Chinatown regularly and he plays occasional gigs. So if you're very lucky, you can actually hear Henry. As an aside, Henry learned how to play guitar when some long-haired boys pulled up to the Chinatown gas station where he was working, and Henry offered to fix their car in exchange for guitar lessons because he saw the guitars lying in the back seat. His teacher turned out to be Tommy Chong of the not yet famous stoner comedy duo Cheech and Tom. And Tommy did go on to own and manage the Shanghai Junk nightclub at Main and Pender. So a lot of you don't know that Tommy Chong had a real history here. For Susanna and Carol and myself and our team, this book allowed us to share just a sample of the stories and photos that we've been gathering since the Storytelling Centre opened 4 years ago. And we're happy to talk about more of them with Margaret and all of you. My last slide is just as a reminder to invite you to visit us at the Chinatown Storytelling Centre to not only view the exhibit, but our permanent gallery as well. So I think we're going to be joined by Margaret now.
Thank you so much, Carol and Ramona. And I just have to say, I loved this book, and I took my mom to the Chinatown Storytelling Centre a couple days ago, and it brought back so many memories because Chinatown was a place that we would visit as a family. For my mother to get in touch with, she's Chinese but grew up in Indonesia, so this was a way to remind her of home and remind us that her kids were also Chinese. So, and I kept looking at the archival photos and thinking maybe if I looked close enough, I might catch a glimpse of our family in some of the photos because it was such a gathering place for so many people. Carol, what did it mean for you to bring these photographs back to Chinatown and display them there at the Storytelling Centre?
Well, I think that, it was a really wonderful thing for us because we deliberately called it the Storytelling Centre. We could have called it the museum because we opened we were the first permanent exhibition space to tell the story. But we felt stories were the way that we can connect with community. And We'd been collecting all these stories for 5 years, and so to have this opportunity where we'd been doing the research, and I think we had 50 interviews, we've got 220 stories that we've collected, to be able to pair it with these wonderful Fred Herzog photographs, as well as other archival photos that we had in our collection. It was kind of a dream come true, I think, in a way. Yeah.
And Ramona, can you just talk about Fred Herzog and what drew him to Chinatown?
Well, interestingly, he was an immigrant himself. He comes from Germany in 1953, and his day job is to be a medical photographer. And by night, he walks, not night, after work, he walks around Chinatown, Strathcona, and he's impressed with the vitality that he sees on the street. And but he just takes photos, and some of them are untitled, some of them you don't know where he's taken them. But when we took a close look at these photos, and we were able to identify exactly where they were, that really brought the picture home to us.
I'm just going to add on. Sorry, Margaret. I think that the other thing too is that, you know, we had Light Up Chinatown this year, and one of our docents happened to mention, she said, people are very proud of these photographs. They're looking at the same one that you're looking at. I wonder if I know anybody that's in the photographs. But I think also what elevated the way they looked at their own history. And that was a big part of what we wanted to try and do at the Storytelling Centre, which was to give people pride in their past and to look at history in a very different way than kind of how we saw it when we were living it.
Yeah. I think it's important to be seen. I think, you know, some of us grew up, you know, just being invisible, not wanting to step out of line or, you know, draw attention to yourself. But it is rewarding to see yourself reflected in photos like that.
And can you tell me a little bit about how you actually did the research? Because even looking at the photos here, the pictures of Peter's, I was with a friend who sometimes sells clothing where it's Erin Templeton, and we were going, okay, I think this is Erin's, yeah, and we were comparing the windows and the Google photos, and you've got the map in the back, but you were doing a bit of almost detective work in pulling together these buildings and these stories.
We're grateful to have Susanna Eng, who is a dogged researcher. She looked into the photos, and, you know, we zoomed up close. Could we see another address next to it? And this window looks like it could be the window of this building. And we really did detective work for, you know, to identify where each of the Fred Herzog photos were taken.
What does it mean, Carol, to be able to add those layers of story and those layers of history and context to these photographs?
Yeah, I know, because I was a big fan, like probably many of you, of the Fred Herzog photographs, and I've got all of his books. But I think it just added another layer of history and texture to what was going on behind the scenes. Now, one of the others, because I was looking at the feed, but there's a photograph, and it's called Black Man Pender, and it's one of my favorites. So it's a man walking down the street, I think, with his daughter and a dog. And so it's a gorgeous photograph. But what we were very lucky to have is Susanna. So she is a 3-time, like you, Jack Webster Award winner. And she was the editor of the Bing Pow. So she translated the words on the window next to the man. Now, we'd never think of doing that. I only read English. But it translated into Tanning, and it was a gambling club owned by a man named Gordon Lee. So it turns out that we actually know his sons, who are now in their 80s, so Gary and Alvin. And so they both interviewed him, and it's like, well, what was going on, you know, at the gambling club? And that would have been back in the 1940s or 50s. And they said, well, a lot of the white wives would go to City Hall to complain that their husbands were gambling and losing all of their savings. So what happened? They sent down the police chief and the then mayor, and so they did these inspections. And you know, the Chinese were quite resourceful, and what they did is they took the law enforcement officials out for Chinese food every Friday night at the Ho-Ho. So, but it's just tying all of these different things together, and it doesn't end there. I was telling the story to a friend of mine who turns out his grandfather was a notorious gambler, Bruce Sung, for anybody who might know him. And his grandson David relayed the story that there was a historic poker match. It was very well known, and he was playing against, there was 2 people left, he was playing against a man named Peter Brown, And Peter won, and apparently Peter, and I confirmed the story, that is the money that he used to start Canaccord. So I love all the different layers. So Chinatown wasn't just for the Chinese, it really was for everyone. And I think that that's what we keep unearthing as we delve into more and more of these stories. So it's fun. It's fun to bring them to life.
And you talking about the gambling, I remember in the 70s going to Chinatown and going to, I think it might have been the Ho-Ho, and then going to the washroom and getting lost in the way back and opening a door and it being full of people doing something. Yes. It's like, Mom, I don't know if I'm supposed to go in that room. Yeah. So
I remember walking down the streets and hearing the click-clack of mahjong tiles. Yeah. And I never hear it anymore, but I think that would send me right back to childhood as well.
And Ramona, tell me about your connection to Chinatown and what it means to be able to see these photographs in this context.
I did not grow up in Chinatown, but my mother did. She was born, in a house on Union Street. So I think for the longest time, growing up as a teenager in Burnaby, and I was born in the Northwest Territories, I think I didn't recognize the importance of Chinatown, and now I do, and I feel like I'm paying some tribute to my mother by being able to honor it and continue the stories from this amazing neighborhood.
And Carol, your connection to Chinatown goes back a long ways as well.
Yes, my grandfather was, I think he's considered, they had an exhibition at the Chinese Cultural Center of one of the early sort of three pioneers that he had a small microfinance business, and so you would sort of help people that were coming from the villages in China. So I've long been going to Chinatown. Like a lot of my childhood was growing up, the big family dinners and extended family sort of outings. And I've said before, it's like sometimes you don't realize how important something is until you're at risk of losing it. Now, growing up, I didn't really, like now I say, oh, it was so beautiful. But having to go then, I'm not so sure I loved going to Chinatown, but we were there. But it wasn't until I was risk of losing it, then it's like, oh, well, maybe this is something that is worth saving. So
you write in the foreword that Chinatown saved you. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's funny. I'd sort of traveled, and I came back in the early 2000s, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, you should consider coming to." He was part of something called Social Venture Partners. He said, "Why don't you come and move your office to downtown East Side or Chinatown, and we can be part of something that tries to help revitalize." And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go down and try and help save it, but when I reflect, the neighborhood saved me because it actually gave me a purpose, and it gave me something that it turns out I was quite good at doing, because every 5 years I changed industry, so I knew lots of people from lots of different areas. And it's something that my father and I had a big argument because he didn't think it was somebody we could save it. He said, no, it's too difficult. But I knew that there was a latent love for the neighborhood because so many people I grew up with, Chinese or non-Chinese, that's where we would go. At university, you'd go there for dinner. It's the only place that people could afford to go to. You could bring your own alcohol. So, people would go down there with the brown paper bags. So it was a place, I think, that there was a lot of happy memories attached to it. And so I think that kind of nostalgia, that I feel that there's the same feeling with the downtown East Side and Hastings Street, that is worth saving. Yeah.
And Ramona, a lot of people have associations with Chinatown of food, whether it's eating in the restaurants or going there to shop and chase your mother around while she buys oranges and barbecue pork for your grandfather, which is what I did a lot of. But tell me about how you deal with food in this book.
Well, Herzog had a photo of the many neon signs in Chinatown showing just the plethora of restaurants. And I think everyone in here, if you've been to Chinatown, was at one of those restaurants. The small diners, the large banquet halls, the intimate little coffee shops with the stools. And food, foodies are everywhere. People love it. And I think those photos really, remind you of the importance of gathering. And coming to a place like that and trying dim sum. I mean, you didn't have to be Chinese Canadian to appreciate all that. It attracted, Prime Minister Trudeau, Senior. He popularized one of the restaurants, and I don't know, it was just such a vibrant place. I think when you see those photos, especially of the Hong Kong Cafe and Becky Lum's memories, how many of you remember the apple tarts at the Hong Kong Cafe? World famous. And her father ran that. Her father and uncle ran that little cafe, and so that story is in there.
I'm on North by Northwest. Sometimes we had people write in to share memories of Chinatown in hopes of winning this book, and also Donna Sato's book before that. And those apple tarts came up more than once.
Yes.
I'm not kidding.
Well, how many people here remember those apple tarts?
Carol, why is it that food connects people in such a way, do you think?
Well, I think it's a universal thing that, you know, in so many different cultures, food is what connects us. It's the gathering, it's the sharing of stories and the connection. So I think for, you know, those, in her example, the sort of the gathering, you know, the Hong Kong Cafe was really unique, and that is part of a story where a lot of what happened was when they got the sort of the immigrants to come and help finish the railroad, they only wanted the men. So there was an exclusion act. So there's a lot of men that came over, but there was no women. They didn't want them to have families. So they would gather in places like the Hong Kong Cafe. And so you see these rows of men with their hats on, and they looked very sad. So that was their little happiness, I think, was sort of going to a place like that, being able to read a newspaper on a wall where they would share the news. So we see it in some ways as kind of a happy place, but I think there was a lot of sadness there too in Chinatown. Yeah.
And Ramona, one of the pictures also tells the story of social justice related to the restaurants with the waitresses who were, the city made the Chinese restaurant owners let them go.
Right. Well, at the height of the Depression, women had to go out to work, and some of these smaller cafes hired white waitresses, and that was against a 1923 act, the Girls in Protection Act. 1928. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much. And so these waitresses, they were fired, they were dismissed, and they went to City Hall to protest, 15 of them, and they just said, our employers are fair and generous, and there's no need to protect us from this. But women needed to work at that time as well. They needed those jobs. So if they found them in Chinatown, who's to say they couldn't work there? The city of Vancouver.
And Carol, you talk about the newspapers, and there's photographs of the men gathering to look at the newspapers. There's also archival photos of the press, the printing presses that were busy in Chinatown for so long. What role did Chinatown play in terms of a place for people to gather and communicate and learn about the news?
Ramona?
Well,
Sorry,
the first photograph of men reading newspapers out on the bulletin board was 1918. And Fred Herzog also captured the same image, men reading these newspapers. And, maybe they couldn't afford to buy them, but they would gather in front to read the news. Sometimes they would submit stories or poetry, and so it would give them a creative outlet. But it was a way to sort of keep the community together and to inform them of what's happening in the motherland and what's happening in their own new home. So, newspapers are important. We didn't have smartphones or the internet.
And radio was important too, which is how you were connected there as well.
Radio, okay, yeah, that's a thing for the 1980s and 90s. But Chinatown's first radio broadcaster was a man named Harvey Lowe, and he broadcast for CJOR in a program called China's Calling from the Bamboo Terrace, the basement of the Bamboo Terrace. And there's and Harvey Lowe, if anyone of you remember, was a champion yo-yo guy. I think at very young age he won this world championship, and he became Chinatown's impresario. He was just out there on stage at the Marco Polo with his yo-yo. I remember seeing him. It was like pretty amazing, he broadcast right from Chinatown. Amazing.
And I love there's a picture in the book as well of a window full of radio equipment and places you used to go there to get your very important radio fixed.
Your radio repaired. Yeah, I mean, who listens to radio? Well, no, we listen to you, Margaret. But, that was the day where you get your information in the news, in the newspaper or by radio. Pretty amazing.
And Carol, it's interesting to see those businesses, the different layers of history, things like the radio shop that's no longer there, or the nightlife. Like I remember going to Ming's and seeing the photographs of the beautiful singers from, I think from Hong Kong, the beautiful black and white and sometimes color photographs. And it was such a mecca, as you say, for nightlife. What was Chinatown's role in that aspect of Vancouver?
Well, I think it was in that particular time, it was one of the areas to go for entertainment. And, I still remember going with my parents. Some of the people here, you go for midnight noodles. Like, I think most people now don't want to go there at midnight, but it was a place that you would go for you call it a late night snack. And there was nightclubs. I think that in the building that my grandfather owned, I think they said, oh, Frank Sinatra was here. He had played. So it really had this wonderful, wonderful history. And I think what's been exciting for me is that this idea of a destination for entertainment and food is coming back. So I think that we have the highest number of Michelin rated or Michelin recommended restaurants in Vancouver. We have 3 of the best 50 bars in the world in Chinatown, and the New York Times just did a story on a speakeasy, so they named 10 best, and we have 1. So you can sort of see its resurgence is coming back, and I think it's kind of a different thing. There's Chinatown during the day, and we've got the Storytelling Centre, the Sun Yat-sen Garden, we've got the Chinese Canadian Museum, so there's lots of things, shops, but now there's a nightlife too, which I think is that dimension that was gone for a long time, but really which helped put Chinatown on the map. Because Chinatown, if you think about it, it became very popular sort of in the 50s, and it was a place to go to eat. And so it's wonderful to see that coming back, and I want to admit that I actually own a restaurant. So part of the foundation, the 3 pillars of the revitalization are physical revitalization and social housing. So we have built Bob and Michael's Place, so it's a 231 units of housing on Hastings. And then we have economic revitalization and cultural revitalization, which the Storytelling Centre and the book would fall under. But under economic, restaurants are a foundational piece, I think, of a vibrant Chinatown, but it's too risky to do in a foundation. So my father, I said, I'll put my hand up and do a restaurant. He was like, no, that's such a bad business. Everybody goes bankrupt. So anyways, I was determined. And what I did was I had actually gotten the number from this next door neighbor when they were still operating, called, some of you might know it, Daisy Garden or Gamgotyun. Anyways, I just had this idea that if it ever burned down, that how would I get a hold of these people that were working there, because I only speak English. So I had this telephone number, and actually, sadly, it did burn down. So I called this number, and the lady we managed, I got it, probably Susanna, got a translator to call them. And so I hired the people there and to not work for a year, and that I would open a barbecue restaurant, which I did. And so we've now been open for 8 years. God looked after us, because it should have gone bankrupt for sure, but we're still operating, and it's a wonderful addition to the neighborhood. So I'm very happy to be part of that food, sort of the food movement in Chinatown. Yeah.
And the restaurant has a wonderful sense of connection to the past, but it is also in the now. So how do you balance that sense of history and the present and the future?
Well, I think everything that we do at the Chinatown Foundation, the Storytelling Centre, or the book, it's all rooted in history. So it's all, that is the foundation of what we build, but you can't be stuck there either, because you want to think about the present, and you want to bring new people in, you want to bring this next generation in. So you have to look to the future, and that's, I think, an exciting thing for us, is that we've got a lot of school programs, and we see these kids coming in. So yeah, I think that, our motto has really been honoring the past, shaping the future, and that's what we're so happy to have all of you here today.
And speaking of that history and those stories, Ramona, how did you and Susanna go about collecting the many stories that are in this book?
Well, Carol said, go interview so-and-so, and anyway, it started with the interviews, and so for 4.5 years we've been calling out to people in the neighborhood, do you have a story to tell based in Chinatown? Did you have a contribution? And we're still interviewing. sometimes we miss them, they're elderly and it's too late. And we're a very small team, so we do try to get to as many people as we can. And it's so rewarding. I can't tell you, it's really rewarding and touching.
Well, and it was, if I might just add on to what Ramona said, it was a different take on thinking about what the history was. There was a reason that, actually, I want to call it a museum, is because that construct is something where somebody at the top is telling you what the history was. But actually, in this case, we said, no, all of the stories matter. It's just the little stories. It could be a butcher, it could be, well, somebody holding a chicken. But collectively, if you put it all together, that's what makes a history. So individually, maybe they're not that important. But if you put it together, it's a very rich history. And so that's why we called it storytelling, because this is a neighborhood where probably a lot of the people were illiterate. So we wanted a place that seemed very accessible, where people could come in and feel welcome, and they shared their story, and that story mattered. So, but Susanna's here. I had a lot of opposition to calling it Storytelling Centre in the beginning, especially from my co-founder, Henry. So he was in the hospital, and she goes, "You better name it Storytelling Centre right now," which I did. And it's interesting, that was 2016, and now storytelling has got a different, people look at it differently. You know, in the beginning, everyone's like, "Oh, it's so long, Chinatown Storytelling Centre." But I think people love stories, and I'm really grateful to be working in a place where people value these interviews and the stories of these individuals that at one time might have been not very valuable, but now we find out they're priceless.
The stories are our artifacts.
Yeah.
They really are. And sometimes we get donations of some real artifacts, and they're not priceless in any way, but the story behind that artifact is priceless to us. So we are, I guess I can say, we're building a learning lab in the basement of our storytelling center, and it's going to be a pretty impressive, immersive space, and we'll be able to tell a lot more stories, both digitally and visually and physically.
And I appreciate the way you set it up so that people can listen to them. You've written them here and contextualize them within the photos. But going to the Storytelling Center, my mom was pretty excited that she could pick up a phone and listen to the stories. So tell me about putting that together.
Well, that's our phone booth. That was we've mocked up one of the 80s phone booths that were used in Chinatown, as decoration. I think it was Fei Liang's idea. And we put in that old receiver 6 interviews, 6 excerpts, 3 in English and 3 in Cantonese, and you can lift up the receiver and listen in. And when we do school tours, the kids all go, "What is that?" You hold up your phone and you say, "That's that," and you tell them about looking for a coin in the old slot, and it goes over their heads, but it's fun, full of nostalgia. And I also want to say, this is not just for Chinese Canadians, it's for all Vancouverites, it's for Canadians, it's a Canadian story. We are not talking about stories from China here, we are talking about true Canadian stories. It's our contribution. We contributed to this nation, and we want to be a part of it, and the Storytelling Centre really enforces that.
Another aspect of the Storytelling Center and of this book is the photography studio of Yu-Chu Chow. Tell me about Yu-Chu Chow. Yeah, okay.
Yu-Chu is known as Chinatown's first photographer, and I think many of you might actually have a Yu-Chu Chow photograph in your personal album, because when he retired after 3 decades of work, and when his sons retired, they threw out all the negatives they ever had, glass negatives from the early days and film negatives later. And so the photos that we show in our studio have all been digitized from personal albums, and also were digitized by Catherine Clement in an early exhibition on Yu-Chu Chow. So you can come into the Storytelling Center and take a digital photograph with an original sort of Yu-Chu Chow inspired backdrop, because they're very iconic, and you get that digital photo into your inbox right away.
I'll just add one little sub-note to that. So, back in those days, I guess the people from the neighborhood, they couldn't go to a regular studio. They weren't allowed. So this is why Yu-Chu Chow set up his studio. And he didn't document just the lives of the Chinese. It was all of the, I would say, many groups, including Italians and the South Asians,
Asians.
and the Japanese, etc. And so most of us would have had family photographs that were taken by Yu Chu Chow. But if you think about, so my grandfather, he came when he was about, I think, 15, and he lived to 103 or 4 and only went home once. So you could sort of see over all those years, the only way you could correspond with your family, or even show them, this is a picture of my wife, or this is a picture of my children or my grandchildren. So he served a very important purpose, I think, of sort of connecting people, not just from China necessarily, but from many other countries to their home country. So I think he really was such a wonderful asset for many communities.
And in the book, with this wonderful research you've done, there's a connection between Fred Herzog, the photographer, and Yu Chu Chow with one of the photographs in there.
That photograph that Herzog takes, there's a man just walking in front of this shuttered studio, and it's a beautiful photograph. It's golden. There's shadowing, but he is indeed walking in front of one of Yu Chu Chow's studios on Main Street, and little did Herzog know that he was taking a photograph of another famed photographer. Probably Herzog had not reached his fame then. I think it was before he was just taking his Kodachrome slides, and he didn't actually become famous until 2009 or so. Yeah, when he printed them.
And when you put the photographs together, we both got to see the pictures of you, each as children in Chinatown. And as you say, there's a section called Raised by Chinatown. How did Chinatown raise you?
Well, sometimes you don't know until you look back. I think you need to have the benefit of hindsight. And so I've often used the quote, Steve Jobs, where you don't really know how the dots are going to connect, but you have to have faith, you have to believe in karma. And I think that Chinatown really was fundamental to sort of like how I evolved in the sense of trying to fit in and sort of living both two different communities. So, you're Chinese, but I grew up in North Vancouver, and then we moved to the British property. So, there wasn't very many Chinese families. So I think that, Chinatown, I never realized was a big part of who I see myself now. But I didn't know it back then, because I think that, I don't know, some of you out there, it's something you kind of tried to escape in a way. You didn't, in those days, you definitely did not want to be Chinese. So, but going forward, the fact that I'm actually thinking that I, would be proud to actually say I'm from Chinatown, or even trying to help revitalize it, if you'd asked me 30 or 40 years ago, I said that would be impossible. So, yeah.
If there was a storytelling center in my life when I was a 15-year-old, self-conscious girl from Burnaby, I think it just would have changed my outlook on, myself as a Chinese Canadian person, because, those were the days when people would say to you, "Where did you come from?" And I'd go, "Burnaby." No. Yeah, I mean, where did you really come from? My mom and dad were born in Canada. No, you know what I mean. They don't ask that anymore, but I think, you are self-conscious, and you sort of you absorb that you shouldn't be here.
It was interesting because when we started the Storytelling Centre, I've had a lot of different mentors. I've been really lucky, and I remember one sharing this idea. He had worked for the Canadian government, and he was telling me a story. It was related to something in Afghanistan, so it was many, many years ago. But he said, you need to have pride in your past to have hope for your future. And that was I think a lot of what guided me and how we created the Storytelling Centre. Yeah.
Paul Yee writes an essay in this book, and he has a line here that I jotted down, which I think is important. He says, "This adds precious links to the chain of history to which we are all attached."
Well, Paul, as you know, was very inspirational to us. And he was also the curator of the Saltwater City exhibition in 1985, 1986, of which I was also on the planning committee for. And I just view what we've done at the Storytelling Centre as Saltwater City 2.0. Just a continuation of that, a modern version of what we accomplished in those days.
And there's so many stories and so much history to go to. There's one section that I do want to make sure we talk about, Carol, which is the section that's devoted to the movement to stop the freeways through downtown Vancouver. Why was that important to include?
because without that particular story, there would actually be no Chinatown. And so the woman that we interviewed for the story is somebody some of you know, Shirley Chan, and her parents, Walter and Mary Chan, started something called SPOTA, so called the Strathcona Property Owners and Tenant Association. So I think that they had already, like the city, not the city, was it the city or the province or even the federal government? All three levels of government were going to put a freeway through, and they were successful for the first 2 rounds. And then Mary and Walter and Shirley, who was then and probably just in her late teens or early 20s, went out and started mobilizing the community. And so they were the ones that actually, you know, sort of stopped it from being completely eradicated. And, you know, she's a good friend of ours. I wish she could be here tonight. But I know that Suzanne and Ramona have interviewed her, and she's, I think, very, very proud of that chapter and the role that they played. And I always say to her, it's like, no, you know, without you, we would have nothing to save. So.
Indeed, and I think it's pertinent to point out that SPOTA actually was formed when the city and the federal government wanted to push in urban renewal and build market housing in Chinatown. So that's when SPOTA was born, and then they joined the freeway fight as well. So they had become community activists. They taught themselves how to interact with planners and politicians in the way no neighborhood could have done. But they had the confidence to do it, which all the power to them. It became a model for how citizens should interact with government when there's change afoot.
And as I mentioned, many of the buildings photographed in the book are still there. They look very different as some of the businesses have changed. But I find myself, as I said, looking at the map in the book and looking at Google Maps and trying to place myself in the present. I want to ask each of you how working on this has changed your perspective of Chinatown today.
Gosh. People always ask, you know, has there been change? And I look and I think the foundation has been able to make some significant physical change, and also with the Storytelling Centre, we're giving some honor to our culture, the culture that's there. But I think we have a tremendous problem on East Hastings, and that is for all of us to share. And so I feel like people don't forget this neighborhood. It's a foundational neighborhood in Vancouver. It's foundational, you know, to Canada. And we need to pay attention to what's going on down there. So I invite you to come to Chinatown, enjoy the food, shop there. Don't be afraid to come. A lot of people say, oh, you work down there, aren't you afraid? I'm not afraid. These are somebody's children down here, and I just think we can't forget that.
How do I feel about Chinatown? You know, it's been an interesting arc for me. So I moved my office down there in 2004, and I could just gradually see that if we didn't do something, I knew that it would eventually disappear, the trajectory. And so we started the Chinatown Foundation in 2011, much to my father's dismay. He said, no, it's not possible. And I said, no, I think that we can if we get enough people who share the same idea about this neighborhood. And for me, you know, it's interesting, as I said, sometimes you don't realize how important something is until you're about to lose it. And I think for me, Chinatown, when I started doing a little bit of my own research before I had the benefit of Suzanne and Ramona, and for the first gala that we had in 2016, I wrote all the copy in this brochure. And I was reading about the railroad workers that we'd imported from to complete the Trans-Canada Railroad, which was a condition of Confederation. And so basically these people helped make Canada a country, and then they were kind of discarded. They couldn't get home, and they ended up in this place. Actually, it translates into Saltwater City. It was on the edge of a swamp. And so for me, I think a lot of it came from the belief that this was the physical legacy of that sacrifice and contribution. So that is why this Chinatown to me was important, because it was still standing. And actually, if you start looking at it, it's actually quite beautiful. So, you know, that's where we are now. We've got some money from the federal government and the provincial government and the city government in 23. So this was unprecedented, and hopefully in the next couple of months, you'll be able to come by, because we're able to use that money to uplight some of the beautiful buildings there so you can see what it looks like at night. We, lit the Millennium Gate, some of the other icons in the neighborhood. And I think that this is sort of the attempt for people to sort of relook and see what was there and what it can be.
I want to ask each of you, what is your favorite place in Chinatown?
Mine is 168 East Pender.
The Storytelling Centre, both of us.
Oh, right.
We did the new facelift, and it's we can't wait to open the Learning Lab. I think people are going to be really happy when they see what we've created there.
What do you hope people take away from this book, Carol?
I hope that it gives them a sense of hope of what can be. And I think that, Ramona mentioned that it's, this is not just about Chinatown, it's about Chinatown and our neighbors, like Strathcona and the downtown east side, and how we can try and revitalize. It's not gentrify, but and bring life and uplift people. I think that for us, our strategy has always been around people. It's people-centric. How do we lift up people? How can we uplift the infrastructure that supports them? And I think that's what I'm hoping, is that people can see what's possible.
What do you think Fred Herzog would think of Vitality, Ramona?
I would hope that he'd be proud of what his work inspired, and I think it adds depth to what he's done. So as an artist, of course, artistically, the photos are beautiful. They're full of shadows and lots of meaning, but we have given it extra meaning. So I think he'd be pretty proud of that.
What do you want people to take away from this book that you and Carol and Susanna
I just want you to
put together?
take the book. Really just some pride in this neglected neighborhood, and to come back and join us there.
I think that this is a good place to end. Yes. Thank you so much to all of you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Carol, Ramona, Jorge. And yes, thank you so much for coming today. Claire is over there from the Chinatown Storytelling Centre with the books. And then you can, if you have questions or you want to chat with Carol and Susanna and Ramona, they will be sitting there with the books. And thank you all for coming out, and thank you to the library for hosting this wonderful event. Good evening.
Thanks.